Your objective for lesson 10 is I will use the distributive property as a strategy to multiply and divide. So we've worked on the distributive property quite a few times. Remember that this is the property where you break apart a factor to help you solve it easier. We usually stick with it when we're multiplying, but we're also going to do that when we're dividing today. So let's try using the break apart and the distribute strategy to solve 6 times 8. Take a look at my array, and also I want you to draw this array on your board. Push pause so you can do that. So which factor are we going to break apart? Normally we've taken our first factor in the problem and that is the one that we broke apart, but today instead of breaking apart the 6, we're going to be breaking apart the 8 to help us solve this equation easier. So we're going to break our 8 into 5 plus something because we've always worked with our 5s and it helps us solve it easier. So you can see right here that I'm keeping my 6 the same, but in parentheses I have 5 plus 3 because I broke my 8 into 5 plus 3. So you got to look at this array. And since this is 8, we've got to figure out where are we going to draw our line to break apart the array. So do I have 8 rows in this array or do I have 8 columns? So when I'm counting across, so when I'm looking at the rows, I see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when I'm counting down and I'm looking at the columns, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So whenever I'm using my line to break apart my array, I'm actually going to be drawing it down and not across because I've got to break apart the columns. And whenever I draw my line, I'm going to have to break it apart into 5 and 3. So I'm going to have 5 columns on one side and I'm going to have 3 columns on the other side. So I want you to take your marker. I want you to draw a line in these columns somewhere to show that I have 5 on one side and 3 on the other. So push pause in order to do that. So what I was looking for is that your line is right here. You see that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns right here. And on this other side, you have 1, 2, 3 columns. And our 6 still stays the same because I have 6 rows right here on this side of my array. And whenever I go over here on this side of the array, I still have 6 rows. Now, keeping your array, I want you to write the multiplication facts for each part of the array. So you're going to write a fact above this part of the array. What does this part of the array stand for now? And then I want you to write a multiplication fact for this part of the array. What does that part of the array stand for now? Push pause to do that. So on your board, you should have had 6 times 5 above the first part of your array, and then you should have had 6 times 3. So my question to you is, what did we break our 6 eighths into? Because our original problem was 6 times 8. And if you're looking at our array, we broke our 6 eighths into 6 fives, because 6 times 5 is the same thing as 6 fives. And we also broke it into 6 threes, because 6 times 3 is the same thing as 6 threes. So, how does 6 times 5 plus 3 show us 6 fives and 6 threes? Well, when we look at our array, we see that we broke it apart into 5 and 3 because one side of the array has 5 columns and the other side has 3 columns. And we see that each part of the array has 6 rows, so that gives me 6 fives, and this other part of the array gives me 6 threes. So now we're going to solve this 6 times 8 by using the distributive property. So we're first going to solve 6 times 5, and then we're going to solve 6 times 3, and the distributive property always includes addition. So whatever the answer to 6 times 5 was, we're going to have to add to the answer of 6 times 3. And I know that 6 times 5, you may be thinking, okay, I'm going to skip count by sixes 5 times. But anytime you see the number 5 in a multiplication equation, I automatically want you to think, okay, I can skip count by 5s to help me solve this. So, what I want to see on your board is 6 times 5 plus 6 times 3, and I would like for you to write it the way that I just showed you on this screen. After you have it written that way, solve for 6 times 5 and solve for 6 times 3. Add them together to figure out what the answer to 6 times 8 actually is. Push pause to do that. So I know that 6 times 5 is going to be 30, and I know that 6 times 3 is 18, and when I add 30 and 18 together, it's going to give me 48. So my answer to 6 times 8 was 48. We just solved it an easier way by using the distributive property to break apart. Okay, now I want you to draw this array that shows me 7 times 8. Push pause to do that on your board. Okay, once again, we're going to break apart the 8, and we're going to stick with using our 5s to help us solve it easier. So, draw a line in your array where I know that one part of the array there's going to be columns of 5. Do that now on your board. So this is where you should have drawn your line on your array. So now that we have our line where it needs to be, up above each part of the array now, I want you to write the multiplication equations that match that part of the array. Push pause to do that. So this part of the array, I still have 7 rows. That stayed the same, but now there are 5 in each row, so this is going to be 7 times 5. Over here, we still have 7 rows, but there are 3 in each row, so now we have 7 times 3. So we took our 7 times 8 and we broke it up into 7 5s and we broke it up into 7 3s. So this is the first way that we write it. Now we're going to take our 7 and we're going to multiply it by 5, and we're going to take our 7 and multiply it by 3. So we have it written like this now. If you do not have it written like this on your board where it's side by side with the addition symbol in the middle of it, please go ahead and do that. And then I want you to solve. What's 7 times 5 plus 7 times 3, and get the final answer to what 7 times 8 actually is. So push pause to do that. I know that 7 times 5 gave me 35, and I know that 7 times 3 gives me 21. And I know when I add 35 and 21 together, I'm going to get 56. So the answer to 7 times 8 is 56. Okay, we did the distributive property with multiplication. Now we're going to take the distributive property and we're going to use it with division. So we're going to solve 64 divided by 8. I want you to draw this number bond on your board, and I want you to put 64 divided by 8 at the top of it and leave these bottom 2 circles empty. Push pause to do that. Okay, let's think about how we're going to break apart 64 into 2 numbers that are easier for us to divide. Remember that when we break apart 64, both numbers need to be divisible by 8. And what that means is that what I put here and what I put here, I still have got to be able to skip count by 8 to get to those numbers because I'm still dividing by 8. I'm just breaking apart the 64 to make it easier. And I want you to think of what 8 times 5 is, because we have always used our 5's facts to help us solve equations easier. So on your board, I want you to solve 8 times 5 to figure out what that is equal to. I know that 8 times 5 is equal to 40. So over here on this part of the number bond, I know I'm going to break apart 60 into 40. I know that I'm still divided by 8. So you got to ask yourself, how am I going to figure out this part of the number bond? We know that we're still dividing by 8, so I want you to put that on the number bond. But how am I going to get this number right here? Well, all you have to be thinking right now is, what are you going to add to 40? That would give you 64, because that's the number that's going to go right here. So I want you to figure that on your board. What can you add to 40 that's going to give you 64? The easiest way to figure that out was to take 64 minus 40. What was left over is going to give you what number goes right here. I know that 4 minus 0 gives me 4. And I know that 6 minus 4 gives me 2. So 24 is going to go right here. So now I have broken apart 64 divided by 8 into 40 divided by 8 and 24 divided by 8. Remember, we started this whole thing by thinking of our 5's facts. So we had to ask ourselves, 8 times 5 was what? Because that was going to give us the number that we can multiply 8 by. And that gave us 40, so all we had to do was add 24 to 40 because we knew that 24 and 40 made 64. So we have 64 divided by 8 broken apart into two different equations now. So now we have got to solve it. So we have 64 divided by 8 into 40 divided by 8 and 24 divided by 8. I want you to write this equation on your board. 40 divided by 8 plus 24 divided by 8. And then we're going to solve. We're going to start with 40 divided by 8. Remember, we already know the answer to that because we had to ask ourselves 8 times what is 40. And we already solved that because that is how we got 40. And we know that 40 divided by 8 is 5. Now we're going to come over here and solve 24 divided by 8. That is the same thing as asking yourself 8 times what is 24. And I know that 8 times 3 gives me 24. So to figure out what 64 divided by 8 is, all I have to do now is add 5 and 3 together. And I know that 5 plus 3 added together gives me 8. So up here, 64 divided by 8 is 8. Okay, I want you to go out and take out your problem set and get that ready. Push pause if you need to do that. Okay, says label the arrays and then fill in the blanks below to make the statements true. So we're working with multiplication to begin with. This whole array, if I did not have this line here, gave me 8 times 8, and we're not going to write down what that equals yet because we're going to use the distributive property to help us find out what that equals. And we're working on breaking apart our 8 right here. And this shows me, based on this part of the array, that they broke it apart into a 5 because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So we have got to solve 8 times 5. Remember, you don't have to skip count by 8 5 times to figure this out. Since it has the number 5 in the equation, you can skip count by 5s 8 times to figure it out. So I want you to push pause and write the answer to what 8 times 5 is right here in this blank. I know that 8 times 5 is 40. Now I'm going to go over here. I've got the number 8 because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. The number that goes right here in the blank is, what did I add to 5 to make 8? And you can figure that out by seeing how many are in each row. And when I'm looking at each row, I see that there are 3 in each row. So I'm going to be multiplying 8 by 3. I want you to push pause and I want you to figure out what 8 times 3 equals, and you're going to write it right here in this blank. I know that 8 times 3 is equal to 24. So down here in the box shows the distributive property step by step. They took 8 times 8, they kept the first 8, and they broke apart the second 8 into 5 plus what? I know that 5 plus 3 gives me 8, so we need to have 3 in that first blank. Now they took it and broke it apart into multiplication equations. The first part of the array showed me 8 times 5, and this second part of the array showed me 8 times 3. So now we have to solve both multiplication equations and add them together to find the answer to 8 times 8. They already told me that 8 times 5 equals 40, and by looking up here, I know that 8 times 3 was equal to 24. And when I add 40 and 24 together, I get 64. So up here at the top, now I can write 64. So I want you to push pause, and I want you to come over here to B, and I want you to fill in all of these blanks using the distributive property as the steps to your problem. So they started right here as the commutative property. They said 8 times 9 is the same thing as 9 times 8. They took the 8, they kept it the same. They broke apart the 9 right here into 5 and something else. This part of the array shows me 8 rows with 5 in each row. And I know from over here on this problem that 8 times 5 was 40. Now I'm looking at this part of the array. I still have 8 rows, but now I don't have 3 in each row. Now I have 4 in each row. So 8 times 4 is what needs to go right here. And I know that 8 times 4 gives me 32. So now I'm going to move down to the bottom. 9 times 8 is the same thing as 8 times 5 plus 4, if I can move this. And then they wrote both equations, 8 times 5 plus 8 times 4. And I know that 8 times 5 was 40. I know from up at the top that 8 times 4 is 32. And when you add 40 and 32 together, you get 72. So up here at the top now, 8 times 9 and 9 times 8 both equal 72. Okay, moving on to the distributive property, but doing it with division. This first one, they already did the number bond for you. Now you just have to write down the equations and solve them. So they took 56 divided by 8 and they broke it apart into 40 divided by 8 and 16 divided by 8. So if you can think back to what we just did in the concept development, they're using 40 divided by 8 just like we did because that takes us back to our 5 facts and that's easier to work with. So right here, you can see how they took the main division equation and broke it apart into 40 divided by 8 plus another equation. The way we get this blank right here is just by looking at this equation. This one is 16 divided by 8, so in your blank you should have 16. Now we have to solve 40 divided by 8 and 16 divided by 8 to get our addition equation. We already know that 40 divided by 8 is 5. I want you to solve 16 divided by 8, and I want you to write that answer right here in this blank. If you need to push pause to do that, go ahead and do that. I know that 16 divided by 8 is the same thing as saying, what am I going to multiply 8 by to get 16? And I know that 8 times 2 is 16, so right here in this blank, I'm going to have 2. So to figure out the actual answer for 56 divided by 8, all I have to do is add 5 and 2 together, and that's going to give me my answer. So go ahead and do that on your paper. And I know that 5 plus 2 is 7. Okay, moving over here to number 3. They have once again taken 72 divided by 8 and broken apart into 40 divided by 8. So you see that they're using the 5's facts again. I know that over here, I'm still going to be dividing by 8. So make sure you go ahead and put that down. But you've got to figure out what are they going to divide 8 by. So you got to ask yourself, what can you add to 40 that's going to give you 72? Because that's going to give you what goes in this blank right here on the number bond. So I want you to figure that out and write that on your paper. Push pause to do that. I know that 40, if I add 32 to it, it would give me 72. So in this blank right here, I'm going to have 32 divided by 8. So down here, when I'm breaking it apart, they've got it started for you. And the other equation that we're adding to 40 divided by 8 is 32 divided by 8. We already know that 40 divided by 8 was equal to 5. So now we have to figure out what are we going to add to 5. And the way we figure that out is by dividing 32 and 8. So I want you to divide that and then write the answer to that right here in this blank. I know that 32 divided by 8 gives me 4. So now to find the answer to 72 divided by 8, all we have to do is 5 plus 4. Solve that and write it right here in this blank on your paper. I know that 5 plus 4 gives me 9. The next 2 pages of your problem set is going to be pretty simple to do on your own. It's just working with your 8's facts and skip counting by 8s and then solving multiplication equations and division equations using the fact 8. So on number 4 it says an octagon has 8 sides, and that's what all of these shapes are. These are octagons because each one of these shapes has 8 sides. So we're going to skip count each octagon to find the total number of sides on 9 octagons. They've already started the skip counting for you, so now you're going to continue skip counting by 8 until you get all the way to the end. And what this number right here is going to tell you how many sides 9 octagons have. So I want you to push pause and I want you to finish skip counting, and then I want you to fill in this blank that tells me how many sides are on 9 octagons. So when I'm skip counting, I've got 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72. So therefore, 9 octagons have 72 sides. Moving down to number 5, you've got different parts to number 5. All you had to do was solve the multiplication equation. The first one was done for you. 4 times 8 was 32. So now you're going to solve these other multiplication equations and you're going to write the answer in the blanks. So I want you to push pause to do that. Know that 8 times 6 is 48. I know that 3 times 8 is 24. I know that 8 times 10 is 80. I know that 8 times 8 is 64. And I know that 7 times 8 is 56. Okay, moving on to the next page, you need to draw a line from the umbrella to the correct raindrop. I did not draw lines on my paper just because I didn't have to. It would make it look confusing on here, so I just went ahead and wrote the answer next to each umbrella. I do want you to draw lines to the correct raindrop on your paper when you do this. Whenever you are done, you may push play to check your answer. 32 divided by 8, you should have drawn your line to 4. 16 divided by 8, you should have drawn your line to 2. 64 divided by 8, you should have drawn your line to 8. 48 divided by 8, you should have drawn your line to 6. And 72 divided by 8, you should have drawn your line to 9. Hey, your exit ticket says use the break apart and distribute strategy to solve the following problem. You may or may not choose to draw an array. So you're going to take 7 times 8 and you're going to break it apart using the distributive property. Make sure I see all the steps that you took. It says that you can draw an array or you don't have to draw an array. But I am going to say that if you choose to draw an array, I would like to see the line that you're using to break apart 7 times 8. So whenever you're finished with your exit slip, make sure you bring that to me.